In today's video, we're looking into an unsolved case that has stayed with a small town for decades. It's the story of a violent murder that devastated a family and left investigators stuck with far more questions than answers. This is the case of Janet Brown, a case that even after 30 years still hasn't been solved and a search for answers that hasn't stopped. April 11, 1995. It was a Tuesday morning. Contractor Nick Marshall and his son drove out to a large farmhouse in Radnich, the village in the English countryside in Buckinghamshire. They were scheduled to start some remodeling work there, just a regular job on what should have been a regular day. But Nick sensed something was off as soon as they pulled up. The house sat back from the road on Spriggs Holly Lane, quiet and out of the way. But cutting through that quiet was a burglar alarm, still blaring long after it should have been switched off. It didn't make sense. Something had clearly happened and no one had taken care of it. Nick went up to one of the windows, hoping he'd spot a simple explanation. Instead, with every step closer, his worry grew. What he saw through that glass would stay with him for the rest of his life. A woman was lying at the bottom of the stairs, not moving. She was 51 years old, and her name was Janet Brown. Nick immediately called for help, his hands shaking as he tried to explain what he'd seen. And from that moment on, the quiet village of Radnich became the center of one of the most puzzling murder cases in the UK. To understand how strange this case is, you first have to know who Janet Brown was and why her death made so little sense to the people who knew her. Friends and family described Janet as kind, gentle, and genuinely caring. She was born in Southampton, and those who knew her say those descriptions weren't just things people say after a tragedy. They were true of her every day. Her entire career reflected that. She worked as a midwife before becoming a research nurse at Oxford University, in the Public Health and Primary Care Department at the John Radcliffe Hospital. She spent her life helping others, comforting people, and doing work that mattered. The people closest to her said she had a calm presence and appreciated the simple parts of life. That's who she was, someone who tried to make the world around her a little better. She loved exploring new places, taking trips, and spending time outdoors. Those things really mattered to her. They fit who she was and how she liked to live. Janet was married to Graham Brown, who worked in the pharmaceutical field. Together they had 3 kids, Zara, Roxanne, and Benedict. Their family meant everything to her. Zara, the oldest, had just moved to London for her first job after college. She later said her mom was always the steady one at home, especially when Graham traveled for work. Benedict was 21 and away at university, working on his degree. Roxanne, the youngest at 17, still lived at Brown's farmhouse. Was unlike most homes. It sat in the middle of an 11-acre property, tucked far away from the noise of town. Mornings were quiet except for birdsong, and at night, you could see the stars clearly. The house sat off Spriggs Holly Lane, a narrow country road that only locals really knew. It wasn't the kind of place you'd stumble on by accident. You had to know it existed. Even in this peaceful setting, the area had recently dealt with a series of break-ins, and that changed the way Janet felt about living so far out. She was protected by nature, always thinking about her family's safety. She took it seriously. She joined the neighborhood watch and even became the group's organizer. She also had personal alarms installed in each room of the house. She wanted everyone inside those walls to feel safe. And now, that same woman had been found at the bottom of her staircase. If we go back 24 hours to Monday, April 10th, 1995, we can piece together what her final day looked like. Like she always did, Janet went to that morning at the John Radcliffe Hospital. Nothing unusual stood out. When her shift ended, she said goodbye to her coworkers and headed to the parking lot to get into her Volvo and drive home. The family had just put the farmhouse on the market and an offer had already been accepted. It felt like a turning point, like they were on the edge of a new chapter. Plans at home had also changed at the last minute. Roxanne and a friend were originally going to stay home with Janet that night. Around 3:30 that afternoon, Roxanne decided to head out with a friend who had just passed their driving test. It was a spur-of-the-moment choice, the kind teenagers make without thinking too hard about it. Her friend's mom was a bit uneasy about them going so far on the same day she got her license, so the plans at home shifted. Graham was away in Switzerland for work, so with everyone else gone, Janet ended up spending the night. That wasn't unusual for the family, but it was the detail that would matter most. Around 8 p.m., one of Roxanne's friends called the house and spoke briefly with Janet. As far as anyone can confirm, this was the last time she talked to someone while she was alive. About 20 minutes later, at 8:20, Nick Marshall, the builder scheduled to work at the house the next day, tried calling to go over the plans. No answer. Not long after that, around 9 p.m., Graham tried calling from Switzerland. Again, no answer. Janet usually picked up right away, so this stood out to him. At about 10:10 that night, a friend drove past the Browns' house and heard the alarm sounding. The noise carried across the quiet countryside. When they drove by again a little later, the outside alarm had stopped. It had been ringing for roughly 20 minutes before shutting off on its own. But inside the house, the internal alarm kept going through the night. No one heard it until morning. When police arrived on Tuesday, what they found was both violent and confusing, a combination that has kept the case unsolved for decades. Janet was at the bottom of the stairs, and the position of her body made it immediately clear that she had been attacked. Packing tape was wrapped tightly around her mouth and nose, and her hands were cuffed behind her back. Blood spatter covered the walls and ceiling, showing how intense the assault had been. Investigators believe she was struck repeatedly with a hammer or some other heavy object, causing severe injuries to her head. Despite extensive searches of the property and the surrounding area, the weapon has never been found. Janet had been restrained and gagged, and she was fully naked, but forensic testing showed no signs of sexual assault. Police do not believe the attack was sexually motivated. Just that fact made the case feel even stranger. If the killer wasn't after something personal, then what were they trying to do? Upstairs in her bedroom, Janet's clothes were neatly folded and set aside by the bed. Her nightgown lay on the floor nearby. It painted a clear picture. She'd been going through her usual bedtime routine when someone forced their way in. Everywhere you looked in the house, there were signs that the intruder had gone through it carefully. Drawers had been opened, rooms searched, things examined, but somehow nothing was taken. No jewelry, no money, nothing. So if this was supposed to be a break-in, what was the point? And why would someone kill her so brutally without taking anything? The way they got in was unusual too. The killer had brought special tools to cut through the glass on the back door. This wasn't some random smash and grab. They came prepared to cut carefully through the glass, but that didn't work, and eventually they just smashed the second panel of the patio door. In the quiet country night, that would have been loud, especially if someone was home. It didn't make sense. Why try to cut the glass quietly first, then break it anyway? Were they in a rush? Did their plan fail? And the strangest part, the intruder had brought tape and handcuffs. This wasn't something they grabbed in the moment, it was planned. But why would someone bring that kind of equipment? Detective Superintendent Martin Short, who had been a police officer for 28 years, said he had never seen anything like it. It wasn't a normal burglary. It wasn't a typical murder. The circumstances were all wrong. The police were able to narrow down the time Janet was killed by looking at phone records and the alarm. She answered a call around 8 p.m., but after 8:20 she didn't pick up again. Then, around 10:10, the alarm went off. Somewhere in that 2-hour window between roughly 8:15 and 10:05, Janet Brown was killed. One of the 2 panic buttons in the house had been triggered. One panic button was by Janet's bed on the 2nd floor, the other by the front door on the 1st floor. The fact that the alarm went off at all suggested she had a brief moment to call for help, even while being attacked. The police weren't sure which button she had pressed. From there, the investigation went wide and deep. They weren't going to let this case go cold without trying everything. Forensic teams combed the property by hand, checking the grounds, the fields, every inch of the large estate. Inside, investigators went over the house meticulously, looking for fingerprints, fibers, DNA, or anything else that could point to the killer. They followed up on roughly 500 leads. Around 2,000 statements were taken from anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. Neighbors, friends, family, coworkers, anyone in the area. Police went door to door asking questions. Have you seen a strange car or a person around here? Every small detail matters. Even the tiniest clue could break the case wide open. In the days after Janet was killed, things were surreal for her family. Roxanne later remembered going to the grocery store and seeing rows of newspapers with her mother's face on the front page. The private tragedy had become public and everyone could see their grief. Like many who survive a family tragedy, Roxanne also felt a deep, knowing shame. That night, she and a friend were supposed to stay at Janet's house. She couldn't stop thinking. Would her mom still be alive if they had been there? If more people had been in the house, could they have scared the killer off? Or would more people have been hurt? It's the painful what if that haunts those left behind. The autopsy revealed just how brutal Janet's last moments had been. She had been hit in the face repeatedly with a lot of force. There were marks all over her body showing she had been restrained, forced to lie on her back. The restraints had been so tight around her nose and mouth that she probably would have suffocated within minutes, even if the blows hadn't killed her. Investigators estimated it took the killer about 30 seconds to get from the bedroom upstairs to the broken back door. This is where it all happened. The fight in the bedroom, where Janet came face to face with the person who killed her. Investigators found a small piece of tape on the floor, a sign that a struggle had taken place. The killer's callousness was clear in other ways too. The key to the handcuffs used to restrain her was found under Janet's body. They had put her in restraints and then left the key there. It was a final, cruel touch. Even as alarms went off all over the house, the killer didn't flee. Instead, they stayed, calmly moving through the home, searching carefully. Forensic investigators found evidence that the killer had washed their hands somewhere in the house before coming back upstairs. Blood on the bedroom light switches wasn't thick. They were composed enough to clean up while Janet lay nearby, dying or already dead. Almost nothing about this case made sense. Most burglars try to avoid confrontation, looking for empty houses where they can sneak in and out without being seen. But this killer went into a home with the lights on knowing someone was inside. Why take that risk? Even the way they broke in was strange. Why bring special tools to carefully cut the glass, only to smash it loudly in the end? Why bring handcuffs to a break-in? And why kill someone so violently but take nothing? It didn't fit the pattern of ordinary theft. It raised questions no one could answer. Was the killer looking for something specific? Was this an attack disguised as a burglary? Or was there some other reason the police couldn't see? When you look at everything together, the items brought to the house were unusual. A weapon, shackles, parcel tape, and glass cutting tools. In February 1996, police highlighted something specific, a type of weatherproof tape used on windows. This wasn't normal household tape. It was a specialty product used in things like greenhouses and clothing. That year, only a little over 3,000 rolls had been sent to the nearby area. Investigators thought someone might remember selling a combination like that, a knife for cutting glass, weatherproof tape, and chains. That mix could trigger a memory for someone, maybe even lead the police closer to the killer. During the appeal, Detective Superintendent Short made an important point. The killer must have been covered in blood. With all the fighting and the injuries, there would have been a lot of it. That means they must have cleaned up somewhere, and someone might have noticed something unusual. Then, about 10 months after Janet was killed, the police received 2 messages on an answering machine from a man who wouldn't identify himself. Investigators were convinced these calls weren't fake. The content and the way he spoke suggested he had real knowledge, information that could be important to the case. The police asked him to come forward to tell them what he knew, but he never did. No one ever heard from him again. To this day, his identity remains a mystery. How did he know the details? Why did he even try to reach out? And what stopped him from following through? By June 1996, more than a year after Janet's death, a 47-year-old man was being held on murder charges. His identity was never made public. Woburn Green Police Station questioned him, but the lead went nowhere, just like so many others in this complicated case. Eventually, the man was released and the investigation continued painfully slowly. For the Brown family, April 10, 1995 was the day the world ended. Time usually eases grief, but it didn't help when the killer was still free and justice felt so far away. Zara had panic attacks and would wake up at night, listening for any sound, afraid someone might break in. The family never returned to the house on Spriggs Holly Lane. How could they? It wasn't a home anymore. It was the place where their mother and wife had been brutally killed. The memories were too raw, the wounds too fresh. Roxanne moved in with Zara in London, but still took the train back to Buckinghamshire to finish her A-levels. The family became hyper-aware of their safety. They installed grills on every door and window. They no longer felt secure, something most people take for granted. Janet had been calm, gentle, and kind. That night it was dark and she was alone. Why would someone need to be so violent? She couldn't fight back. She was restrained. There was no reason for the level of brutality used against her. Her family said it all felt completely surreal. Over time, the case had faded from the headlines, and as the intensive investigation slowed, new leads dried up. Then, in 2015 and 20 years after Janet's death, something finally gave people hope again. The Major Crime Investigation Review team began looking at her case with fresh eyes. 20 years earlier, Forensic science didn't have the tools that were available now. Items from the original crime scene were re-examined using modern DNA technology, and it worked. DNA was found that didn't belong to any member of the Brown family. This could have been the killer's DNA, preserved at the scene for decades, now finally identifiable thanks to cutting-edge science. There was a catch though. The DNA profile didn't match anyone in the police database, which held more than 6 million records. It was frustrating and puzzling. The killer apparently hadn't been arrested for any other major crime, so no sample had ever been taken. He might have been dead or living abroad at the time. The profile gave the police a tool, but without a match, it couldn't instantly solve the case. Detective Chief Inspector Peter Bairn didn't reveal exactly what the DNA had been taken from, but he made a public appeal. There is someone who knows who killed Janet, he said. Someone has information, memories, or facts that could help us solve this case. With the DNA evidence, the police could now link or rule out suspects more efficiently. They tested more than 1,000 men, a huge task that showed just how serious they were about finding the killer. But the person responsible remained in 2015. Janet's children made an emotional public plea. The brutal murder of our mother was planned, they said. The horror of her death stays with us every day. Our family home, where we should all feel safe, was the place where she was taken from us. Thames Valley Police now had new DNA evidence that could finally lead to the killer, but they needed the public's help. They urged anyone with information, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, to come forward. People loved Janet, and her death broke their hearts. The pain didn't fade with time. If anything, it grew stronger over the years. They waited for justice that never came. Crime Stoppers offered a reward of up to $20,000 for information that could lead to an arrest. Thames Valley Police urged anyone with information to come forward, even if they thought the person they knew was dead, because DNA from family members could help match the killer to the evidence left at the scene. Now, more than 30 years later, Janet Brown's murder still haunts Buckinghamshire. The rolling farmland is as peaceful and quiet as it ever was, but underneath that calm, one question remains. Who killed Janet Brown? Her daughter Roxanne was in her 40s when she was hurt by the aftermath of her mother's death, and it changed her life forever. She's cautious now, always aware of her surroundings, hesitant to go alone into the woods or countryside. Someone always knows where she is because of what happened to. These are the scars left behind by her mother's unsolved murder. Violence doesn't just touch the person who suffers it. It ripples through everyone connected to them. Thanks to advances in forensic science, there's more hope than ever of finding the truth. DNA from the crime scene is in the database and ready to be matched. But to make that final connection, police need one crucial thing. Someone with knowledge. Someone who can give a name, a lead, a memory that will link the DNA to the killer. Janet Brown was 51 when she was killed. She worked as a study nurse, was a mother, a wife, a friend, and a community-minded neighbor who started a neighborhood watch to keep her area safe. She loved being outside, going on trips, and spending time with her family. She was kind, gentle, and full of life. She deserved to grow old, see her children have children, retire, and enjoy the life she built. Instead, her life was cut short in the cruelest way possible. And yet the person who took her away has been free for over 30 years. Somewhere out there, someone knows what happened that night. Someone holds a piece of the truth, even if they don't fully realize it. A memory, a clue, a single piece of the puzzle. Anything that could finally help Janet get justice and give her family some peace. It's been far too long. 30 years of unanswered questions, of pain that hasn't healed while her killer remains free. That needs to change. Someone needs to come forward. Now,